So, our question, and for this question you're going to need one or several people to be writing. So you need to get sort of your pens and your papers out. And you can sort of look and see what happens with the dynamics if one person's writing or everybody's writing. So, we're going to give you this question. How many business models, or for the sake of simplicity right now, how many ways of making money? Can you think of around each table, and I have exceedingly high expectations of each table, so how many ways of making money can you think of for a cow? You have 4.5 minutes. Go.
The skin, and then also the dairy products, I guess. Clothes. And then it's the meat. That's about it.
All right. Let's see. How many does this table have? You have 16 on table number 1. You have 8. Well, you're less people, so you can argue that's fair. Table 3?
Between 20 and 1,000.
Between 20 and 1,000, and specifically, how many do you have? 22. Okay. 14. All right. Which one are you the most proud of? Energy as in?
As in the products from the cow.
Yep. Now let's just check really quickly. How many of you had this one? Where you, for instance, you take tourists that arrive in Stavanger and you put them in a boat, you put them in a bus, you drive down to Jæren and you have them pay to flip the cows over. No. What about this one? A cow action figure. Because, we all have seen the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But we haven't seen the Teenage Mutant Ninja Cow yet. There you have it. What about this one? This is a personal favorite of mine. This is like IT meets the cow industry, meets the software industry, meets tablet. A safety remote system for your cow watching, so the farmer doesn't have to leave his couch to check on the cows. You can buy this. It's a Swedish company. And I know several of you mentioned an art event. How many of you had art as a business model for cow? Good. Now, interestingly, most of you have already seen this, so you know intellectually that there is actually an existing real-life business model for cows. Perhaps you didn't want to include it, perhaps you forgot it, which happens pretty frequently. The Cow Parade is a very interesting business model. It's been featured in 75 cities, 32 different countries, and has made way in the excess of 30 million US on public cows, put in public places where they just happen to lay around, hotel receptions and beach bars. And then we'll introduce a concept that we call stretching your ideas. Stretching your ideas, like a rubber band, you stretch it further. Now, if you take the idea of art cow and you stretch it further, how far can you go? These guys, 30 to 35 million, 75 cities, 32 countries. This one cow was sold in London for just around 100 million Norwegian kroners. And the artist realized, oh, that's pretty cool, and he did several. So, how many of you had, hey, let's take a cow, we will slice it down the middle, put it in liquid, and we'll sell it for 100 million Norwegian kroner, give or take. How many of you got that? It makes sense. Did you choose not to share it, or did you just simply forget that you probably already knew this? Which is kind of an annoying fact. Damien has been making some pretty good money on dead cows. And the farmers in Norway, they keep complaining that they need subsidies. Kill them, sell them. It makes more money than keeping them alive. Every single industry, every single item, every single idea will have a nearly endless supply of revenue streams, of business models, if we are willing and able to explore them. But what happens frequently is either a lack of time, lack of curiosity, lack of communication skills. We kill all these ideas before they have a chance to materialize. And like you said, you could probably come up with 1,000 ideas if you just take your time. So the cow is easy. Put the same question to your company and see what happens. How many here are familiar with business models? Question mark. One. How many here are familiar with the business model canvas? Fantastic tool. Cool, excellent. Now for the rest of you, I'm going to give a very, very, very brief introduction to business model. You can explain business models by 3 steps. Step number 1, how do we make money? And this is, for most of you, very important. How do we make money? Question number 2, how do we balance our multiple revenue streams with our cost structure? So here we introduce not one revenue source, but multiple revenue sources, and we also introduce the cost structure. And if you're familiar with the canvas, you know we're talking about the bottom part of the canvas. How do you balance those? And even for a lot of companies, that's challenging enough to be discussing intelligently and creatively. Finally, on the 3rd level, where we would like to see all of you in the very near future, is we work explicitly and visually with the business model canvas, and we're able to discuss and innovate on each of those 9 areas over and over and over again. It's a part of our corporate language, it's a part of our management thinking, it's just a part of how we work. Some companies are getting there. Most companies are still in step 1 and 2. How do we make money? How do we balance multiple revenue sources with cost structures? And how do we handle a complete business model canvas? The business model canvas, as it's used today, is getting traction around the world. And for those of you that are not familiar, we have this.
An organization's business model can be described with 9 basic building blocks: your customer segments, your value proposition for each segment, the channels to reach customers, customer relationships you establish, the revenue streams you generate, the key resources and key activities you require to create value, the key partners, and the cost structure of the business model. But it's not sufficient to just enumerate the 9 building blocks. What you really want to do is to map them out on a pre-structured canvas. This is what we call the business model canvas, a tool that helps you map, discuss, design, and invent new business models. Let's briefly go through the 9 building blocks, starting with the customer segments. These are all the people or organizations for which you're creating value. This includes simple users and paying customers. For each segment, you have a specific value proposition. These are the bundles of products and services that create value for your customers. The channels describe through which touchpoints you're interacting with customers and delivering value. The customer relationships outline the type of relationship you're establishing with your customers. The revenue streams make clear how and through which pricing mechanisms your business model is capturing value. Then you need to describe the infrastructure to create, deliver, and capture value. The key resources show which assets are indispensable in your business model. The key activities show which things you really need to be able to perform well. The key partners show who can help you leverage your business model, since you won't own all key resources yourself, nor will you perform all key activities. Then once you understand your business model's infrastructure, you'll also have an idea of its cost structure. So with the business model canvas, you can map out your entire business model in one image. This works for startup entrepreneurs just as well as for the most senior executives.
The business model canvas is one of several tools that are getting a lot of attention worldwide. The book was published in 2009, and since then it's sort of gone on to become one of the leading visual tools. And Holger has worked extensively with implementing this through workshops and companies. But business models as a visual phenomenon, they've been around for a very long time. This is actually the very first sketch that we've been able to find of Disney's original business model. And what you see here is what we call a high-level systems thinking to your business, where you're not talking about one product, one customer, but you're talking about all of the building blocks that make out your unique company strategy. Very few people that we work with are able to sketch out this kind of level thinking for their company strategy, but it's an important part. Now, Disney is an interesting example, and we'll discuss that very, very briefly, because we all know Disney as the toys, the movies, the theme parks, but do you guys know some of the new things? What are some of the new business models Disney has been playing around with and releasing around the world? Let's take one. What would be a logic step for Disney to go into? Education, yeah. Anything else? This is pretty easy because we talked about it earlier and we have a member of the book industry here. One of the first things that Disney did, and far more aggressively than most European companies, was go into digital books. Disney have a wide range of digital books, crossover, paper, digital, and apps to support it, but that's not really surprising. Disney goes to China. In China, they have a few problems with piracy. They could, like Microsoft, choose to fight the piracy, or they can flip it on its head and say, how do we use piracy to our advantage? Because what are some of the advantages Disney gets when the Chinese copy Disney's products and services and toys? What are some of the advantages? And that's an interesting question we don't ask very often. What are some of the advantages of the Chinese copying Disney? Awareness, marketing, brand building. And then the question becomes, how do we use that to introduce completely new services? Well, here it is. You might not be able to read it in full, but this is Disney's biggest business in China. It's language schools, where they realize that they have such a strong brand with a lot of emotional attachment from the customers, that by turning this into Disney schools, Disney Center of Learning, they're teaching Chinese, young and older, to speak English using My Little Mermaid, The Lion King, and a whole range of movies. It's the biggest revenue source of Disney in China. Do you know what's the newest addition to Disney's services? It's Disney Consulting Company. It's called Disney Institute. It's been around for a few years, but it's not really known outside of the US. But Disney said, hey, we're really good at building customer experience in our parks. That's a service business. What if we teach the rest of the world how to be like Disney? Oops, we did. Today they're working with companies like hospitals in the US, restaurants in the US, to teach them services. And just like Boston Consulting Group started as a bank, Disney is very quickly growing their consulting companies. Now, if Disney can build language schools and a consulting company, most of these companies in here can also add a whole range of new products and services. But this is a question, unfortunately, very few management teams spend time on. So, raise your hand. How much time have you spent to really creatively reimagining and also testing, that's a very important aspect, your business models? We have one hand, we have half a hand, we have somebody scratching their face. You know, we have the innovation team of Statoil. You should be like, yeah, we do it all the time, every day. Because I know you have been working on it. But really, this is something that we're not doing, well, until just now. So, we're going to introduce the next tool. It's called the 3 levels of business models. And what we say here is that we have 3 categories of business models. And to teach you this and teach you how to work on it, I'm going to invite you to grab a chair down there, and I'll teach you this on the wall. So, grab a chair, we'll go down there. So you go back a couple of years, in most of the strategy literature, there would be focus on you need to define your core business, you need to stay with your core business, And by God, you need to protect your core business. And this is what's been happening to a lot of industries. Today we call them getting disrupted. Now, the core idea behind the end of competitive advantage is that strategy needs to be a portfolio of ongoing businesses, ongoing business models, and you need to learn how to cycle through them. And that's what we'll do here. The milk and bread category, that is your low margin, but very stable business. Very often you can reasonably assume revenue streams several years ahead. It was built into most of the finance teaching that you can assume this, but it's really just here you can do it. It's, for a lot of companies, fairly boring. It is not disruptive, it's not highly innovative, but it's important. It is your core business. Then you have the next one. This one is higher risk, higher reward. It's more challenging to solve. It requires more creative thinking. But if you get it, it's much more interesting for the people solving it, and generally it's also much more profitable. Finally, you have swing for the fences. Swing for the fences are those mad ideas and the mad business models that probably will fail. You know, let's just face it, this is probably not gonna work. Again and again and again and again. But to quote Google, 9 out of 10 should fail. Because if not, we're not challenging ourselves. But that's fine, because that one that actually works, it's going to cover all the costs. This is where most knowledge workers dream of working. This is incredibly challenging, it's incredibly inspiring, and it's very often incredibly difficult. Now, if this was a static model, we would say you need so many percent here, so many percent here, so many percent here. It is a very dynamic model. Now, look at Google today. So Google's a very easy example. Google today. What is milk and bread for Google? And you all use it every single day. Search and advertising. Search and advertising is deeply intertwined. And go back a couple of years and 95% of Google revenue came from advertising and search. Today it's 87 and it's dropping rapidly because Google is really getting good at developing new business models. What are some of the things that Google are working on that you would perhaps define in the consulting category? So higher risk, higher reward, more uncertainty, more problem solving, but once we start getting it, it's actually pretty attractive.
Cloud services.
You could argue that, but that's actually kind of covered in here by Google's strategy. It's Android. For many years, Google never made any money at all on Android. They gave it away, and they actually had to pay Apple for each license that was, each OS that was sold. Last quarter, they flipped it, and now they're just starting to make money on Android. And when they project this forward, they realized that, Android is going to be incredibly profitable for us going forward, thanks to Chinese companies, Samsung, and so on. And then they went out and said, we should buy a phone company, preferably one that doesn't make any money. And they picked up Motorola. And some of you might not know this, but about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they bought Motorola, and now they have a hardware company. And Google is working hard on redefining, but they're still not making any money on it, but it's in process. And then just a few weeks ago, they bought this, Nest. Very interesting company with a very complex business model, but they're actually starting to develop a very specific business model around it. So this is Google's category of what we call consulting level projects. And then, as Colin said, Google has something seriously cool, and they're not making money on it, and it's probably going to fail because you guys won't like it. It's called Google Glass. The glasses, the wearable computing. They also have, floating around the southern half of our globe, Loon. How many here knows about Google Loon? So the question is, how can we provide high-level, high-quality, high-speed Wi-Fi to places, remote places like New Zealand's farmers and Antarctica and that kind of thing? And like Telenor, they would start digging, and Altibox would start digging, and Google says, hot air balloons, that's our solution. Today, they're just starting to develop the revenue sources around balloon. Google Wallet is Google's attempt at disruption of the banking industry. And of course, Google is the #1 company in the world that's doing self-driving cars. They've driven more than 500,000 kilometers in 2 states in the US, while most of the old car industry says, well, self-driving cars, I don't think so. There's really no reason why Google should be doing this, but they do. And that reason is Google X. Everybody should have X. X is Google's 100 moonshots. Google says, at all and any given time, we need to have minimum 100 projects that could potentially become bigger than this business. If we don't have 100 projects, we're not trying hard enough. And we would like 90 of these to fail, because those 10, it's going to get bigger than this. And what's interesting, this is a company that's only 15 years old. Imagine what they're going to be doing in 20, 25 years, or 40. That's the first one. And obviously, in a few minutes, you'll be starting on your own. What will, for instance, Communicator 365 look like with a series of what we would call a portfolio of business models, or probably very interesting cases note on in a few years when you're doing this. Now, a far more interesting example is, of course, Tesla. And researching this and preparing this, it's very fascinating to see what Tesla has been doing, because by any definition, Tesla shouldn't be possible. We have a global car industry that's really good at what they're doing, i.e. producing old cars. So about 10 years ago, these 5 guys in Silicon Valley says, let's push the world into electric cars. It's not being done. Nobody else is really doing it. GM tried and then they canceled it, so nobody else is doing it. How hard can it really be? Age, 28, 32, 33, 41, 42. How hard can this be? It's only, the next generation of cars. And when they started in 2003, and notice where I put it, the idea of the Tesla Roadster, which was the performance sports car, was completely swing for the fences. It was virtually impossible. And there were so many evidences to why this won't work. And they started selling it. They sold 200. And all of a sudden they realized, oops, there's a market. We have to figure out how to make it. They started making it. And they realized, oh, it's not really that hard. Well, we're getting the hang of it. And over a span of 3 years, Tesla Roadster became just another product that they managed to scope and scale and produce. And then they did something very interesting. They announced to the world, hey, we're going to do a Model S sedan. And then they stopped this. And for several months, nearly 3/4 of a year, Tesla didn't have any revenues at all. They had a few cars in Europe because they stopped producing and they stopped selling the Roadster. And then they had to figure out, oops, all right, so how do we get the Model S? They sold 6,500 and realized, oops, people are willing to pay for it. We have to figure out how to make it. And again, just imagine that on your company and see where it takes you. And they started making it. Oh, it's not really that hard. We're getting the hang of it. This is really cool. We're learning, and we're scaling. And over 15 months, they reduced production cost and production time by 40%. So that was pretty efficient. And they realized, oh, Model S is now our new core business. And then they announced, and you know this, we're going to make a van-like car. Then they ran into problems because they weren't making enough money. In fact, they weren't making money. This is 2 years ago. And they were starting to get desperate. Elon Musk had funded the company with whatever he had left of his personal wealth. Financial crisis. Banks weren't too happy. What would you do? What would be your new business model? How would you make revenue? Because you couldn't get money from the banks. You didn't really want to get new investors because they were all the old car companies. What would you do for making money here? What would be new business models? Bage? Yeah. And the combination of this, they started doing advanced technology licensing. They partnered up with several car companies, not as beggars, but as experts licensing their technology. And then they had another one. They realized that most of the car industry, they're polluting stuff. We're not. So we can actually sell our emission credits. Fast forward, last quarter was the first ever quarter Tesla was profitable. In percent, how much of their revenue do you think came from the technology licensing? And I don't really expect you to have this answer, and you could Google it, but it's going to take you too long. 10%. Emission credits, how much came from that? 7%. So close to 20% of Tesla's revenue came from, not from the car, but from other things that they didn't really know they had. But when they got desperate, they also got more creative. And then, of course, they announced the Model X. And today there's a lot of discussion around, and also by Tesla, what's going to be next? How does Tesla continue to cycle through these business models? Because by now they have defined the Model S and that type of car, that family car, as their core business. Last year they produced just over 20,000 cars. This year they're going to produce 40,000 cars. In 2021 they're going to produce 500,000 cars. The question is, what do we do here? And what's happening now is that Tesla is seriously looking into, could we develop a global app store for the car industry? Because we know all cars are going to be like our car. It's just going to take longer. Could we become the Apple platform for electric cars? Advertising. We have these two iPad screens. How could we connect to local businesses and become the center of advertising? Battery swaps. Could we develop the technology that allows the rest of the industry to do battery swaps on our standard? And because the rest of the world couldn't produce enough batteries, so they're building the world's biggest battery factory themselves, and they're realizing, ooh, we have extra supply just like Amazon on the cloud. We can sell and become a leading supplier of batteries. We just haven't built a factory. How hard can it be, really? And this is where you're seeing Tesla today. And we're seeing now that this is sort of gliding down to becoming a part of the new core. The battery factory, when it comes online, they'll figure it out. And you have this dynamic aspect that you find in several of the technology companies. And if you look at Tesla, not as a car company, but a technology company, you realize that this is perfect sense. Go back to your company. Most companies stay here, focus here, and they do efficiencies, they do cost cut, they do lean, and they neglect to innovate upwards. So in that introduction, you have your new teams, you have your companies, you have your tools, you have your walls. Go to work on developing what we call a portfolio of business models for one of your chosen companies. If you are advanced users, you can map this out as a complete business model canvas. And you can do it in just a few minutes. If you're more intermediate or just getting started, stay with the big headlines. This is a revenue source, this is a revenue source, this is a revenue source, etc. Questions? Fantastic. Off you go.